Virtual reality has become a fun part of modern life. On one hand, today hardly anyone can be amused with the fact that a special helmet allows you to see the in-game world with your own eyes and even interact with it. On the other hand, even now, not every player is able to tell which games are really worth a try and why all of it exists in the first place. And you know what? I dare to say that this area of the gaming industry is no less interesting than the history of consoles. So make yourselves comfortable, and we'll tell you everything about it. You're on Dragmatic. Please don't forget to subscribe and smash the bell button. We are entering the age of VR. No matter how futuristic the whole VR thing might be, we will still have to start with the dinosaurs in terms of chronology. It all started, scary to think about it, in the ancient year of 1838. Even before the first TV was born, English physicist Charles Watson decided that 3D was better than 2D and created a stereoscope. The mirrors in these fancy wooden glasses reflected offset images for each eye, making the whole picture appear volumetric.
Wow.
Of course, the stereoscope only allowed you to look at static frames, not walk around in a virtual world. However, the basic principle of image separation is still used in today's VR headsets a little less than 200 years later. For over 100 years, no one has gone further into the subject of immersion into another reality than the stereoscope. Of course, there were first versions of simulators for pilots, but so far they have not touched so much on our today's topic. And then, in 1955, American inventor Morton Heilig, known as the father of virtual reality, came on stage. He promoted the idea that cinema should be affecting multiple senses of the viewer at once. In 1957, these ideas were realized in his invention called the Sensorama. It was a small booth, resembling an arcade machine, where the viewer could experience a whole new level of immersion in a movie with the help of smells, airflows, and seat vibration, in addition to video and sound. Thus, for example, it was possible to create the effect of riding a motorcycle. So yeah, 5D movie theaters have quite a distant ancestor. But more importantly, Sensorama essentially became the prototype of virtual simulators, and similar technology can still be found today, for example in Disneylands. Another fun fact, some time ago, the working original was listed on a website for $1.5 million. Now, the site is unavailable, but who knows, maybe some Richie Rich now stores this very 5D booth in his garage. Heilig didn't stop there. And the first thing that bared a striking resemblance to a VR headset also came from him. In 1960, he presented his next step to virtual reality that he named the Telesphere Mask. First, Heilig patented the circuit of the device and then made a prototype. This, however, was as far as it went. There's not much to say about a prototype. In fact, it was the same Sensorama, only in the shape factor of a helmet. Of course, the thing didn't have any motion tracking. This was still a wet dream. But it seemed to be obvious of a development direction. As in many fields, the progress here was fostered by military needs. 1 year later, in 1961, a company called Filico presented the head-side helmet, which was able to track the position of the user's head. However, this device was more like a glorified periscope. The image was still divided for both eyes, but it wasn't computer generated. Instead, it was transmitted via camera. Still, Headsight was doing its job well, allowing a remote look around in a dangerous situation. But in 1968, the world saw a device similar to Headsight, capable of fully immersing its user, not in virtual, but in augmented reality. The sword of Damocles was hanging over the industry. No, seriously, Ivan Sutherland's invention was called the Sword of Damocles because of its intimidating impending appearance. The device offered something in between VR and AR, augmented reality, but we'll talk about the latter in one of our future videos. The important thing is that both branches received an impetus for future development. That is, the Oculus was still a distant future. The Sword of Damocles was bulky, to put it mildly, and nailed to the ceiling, while the image consisted of primitive framed geometric shapes. However, the virtual image was already changing its perspective depending on the position of the user's head, which was a huge achievement. It was in 1975 when American computer artist Myron Kruger decided to take the art to the next level. He created a VR platform called Video Place. It actually can be called a whole multimedia system, as it involved screens, projectors, and a whole bunch of other peripherals. The Video Place itself consisted of 2 rooms that could be any distance from each other. There was a person in each room who could see projections of themselves and, shall we say, their interlocutor on the screen. Users could move their image on the screen as they moved around the room, as well as interact with the image of the other participant. Any user's image could be resized, rotated, changed in color, and the users could also interact with objects that were completely virtual. Even the sound of this futuristic for its day and age, and looks like dark magic. Meanwhile, the technology of motion control, quite important for VR, was also making progress. In 1977, it became possible to track the movement of your fingers with the Siri glove. It had photocells on it that captured light. As the user's fingers moved, it changed the amount of light, causing electrical signals. And unlike its famous descendant, the Power Glove, this glove actually worked, even if it was only a prototype. And then the military was like, hey, we need new technologies. So in 1979, McDonnell Douglas Corporation tried to integrate the still raw VR technology into pilots' helmets. They were trying to solve problems such as using the pilot's head to aim while firing, displaying sensor information on virtual displays, and more intuitive control of the evolving jets. The plan was promising to say the least, but gave no tangible results. In the meantime, pilot simulators were also being improved, with varying success in trying to implement VR and motion control. This resulted in 2 peculiar things. The first is the so-called NASA Virtual Workstation. In 1984, Dr. Michael McGreevy of the NASA Research Center had an adventurous idea. He studied Sutherland's work and his Sword of Damocles, and then proposed a similar system for NASA called the Virtual Workstation. In a nutshell, it was designed as a system to train pilots for space flights. And as a result, 1 year later, the researchers created the Virtual Interface Environment Workstation, or simply VIEW. It was the first system that combined computer graphics and video, 3-dimensional sound, voice recognition and synthesis, and most importantly, it had the form of a helmet. And if you thought that View had a lot of features, it also had motion gloves, so the guys were like, wrap up everything there is at the moment. The image inside this thing is already somewhat recognizable to those who have played with the VR headset. Whether the device was put to use is unclear, but it was quite an impressive achievement for its time. The second thing could be described as kind of a pinnacle development of simulators for military pilots. Back in the 1970s, Thomas Furness experimented with the idea of creating a computer model of an airplane cockpit for the US Air Force. These experiments led to the birth of the Super Cockpit system in 1982. The Super Cockpit had 3D computer maps, enhanced infrared and radar imagery, and the pilot could see and hear in real time. The tracking system and helmet sensors allowed the pilot to control the aircraft using gestures, speech, and eye movement. But the most important thing, of course, isn't that, but the affectionate nickname, Darth Vader, given to the system because of the distinctive shape of the helmet.
That doesn't look good.
Here, I'd like to congratulate all the survivors, because we've finally gotten to something game related. Though we're not even in the 90s yet, so there's not much to say about games, but there's still plenty to see. With that being said, let me introduce you to the first commercial video game that used stereoscopic 3D, Subrock 3D. By the way, the game was released for arcade machines in 1982, not just by someone, but by Sega themselves, just because they could. The 3-dimensional effect was achieved by using a special periscope mounted on an arcade cabinet. The game itself was a first-person shooter, if you could call it that. The player controlled some sort of a submarine periscope and fired at the enemies to gain points. The picture was saturated, the sprites were constantly scaling, all in all, simply splendid, and in 3D on top of that. 2 years later, in 1984, the first home gaming console with 3D peripherals appeared. It was called the Vectrex. Not the best name for something that should be remembered 38 years later. The console itself was a classic home system of the 80s, with games consisting of white squares and transparent screens on the TV instead of colored graphics. But that's not exactly what we're interested in today. Instead is the 3D imager device for the console. And now I'm gonna try and describe how this marvel of engineering worked. The player inserted a special disc with colored filters into the glasses, connected them to the console, and put them on. The 3D imager worked by spinning a translucent wheel in front of the player's eyes. Half of the wheel was black and the other half was colored, so that only one eye could see the screen at any given time. The image was drawn on the screen twice, with a slight shift, one for each eye to give depth to the image. It worked with varying success, as sometimes, for example, there could be 2 images due to natural problems with the human eye focus. The astonishing variety of a total of 3 games and commercial failure of the console made the 3D imager one of the rarest and wanted gizmos among collectors. Its games weren't exactly the industry's finest either. 3D Mindstorm, that came with the device, was a shooter about a ship flying through mines. 3D Narrow Escape was pretty much about the same thing, but the ship was now flying through the corridors of the warlord's fortress. And in 3D Crazy Coaster, the player was riding a roller coaster, trying to do what he does in real amusement parks, not to crash. However, it wasn't all bad. There were enthusiasts who wrote new games for this device and even managed to create its analog, Mad Lads. So somewhere around here, the virtual gaming industry stepped on the gas. In 1986, 2 new games with a 3D effect appeared. The first one was Battle Bird from Irem, a 3D shooter about a battle between 2 galactic empires. The game's arcade cabinet used a system called 3D Vision. It could display stereoscopic 3-dimensional color graphics using a complex system consisting of a dual monitor setup, a half-silvered mirror, and a view with a polarizing filter for each eye. Unfortunately, all that remains of the game is a bulky description and a bunch of soapy screenshots. Another arcade shooter of this year was 3D Thunder Scepter 2 by Namco. The premise of the gameplay is pretty much the same. The player controls a super advanced ship, has a bunch of weapons and hordes of enemies. Gameplay variety will come, but a bit later. For now, please bear with me. The game also used shutter glasses, but Namco has refined this technology with a Fresnel lens placed between the screen and the glasses. The thing is that it has not a usual convex shape, but a complex one with multiple grooves. This allowed the illusion of large 3-dimensional images approaching the player. And here's where the commotion started, because the field of virtual reality welcomed a renowned player named Nintendo. As I said in the series of videos about a history of consoles, the Big N always liked to search for new ways to play games. So in 1987, they presented active shutter glasses called Famicom 3D System. They alternately closed and opened the view for the left and right eye at very high speed. The picture would appear for each eye, creating the 3D effect. Now, were there many games willing to support this cutting-edge technology? Of course not, only 8, and even less if we don't count space shooters. But we'll take a look at these games in the next video, because alas, our time for today is running out. So I'll see you in a week with a story about how VR came to home consoles. For now, I can say that virtual reality has come a long effing way just to get to video games, and it still had to cover just as much to become accessible and understandable for the players. On that epic note, I should invite you to the comment section. Please share what you'd like to see in this series and what do you think about this kind of historical insight. Apart from that, you already know the drill. Smash the like and the bell buttons, and as always, remember to tune in next time.